everybody, I am back with another craft project today. We are going to be making clay jewelry. I'm so excited about this one as usual. Clay jewelry is a super popular trend right now, not only for crafters but for just fashion in general. Everybody wants clay jewelry right now, so today I'm going to teach you how to make your own, and you could even use it as gifts for your friends and family. It is already November. I can't believe it is already November. But nevertheless, here we are, and the holiday season will soon be upon us. So it's a perfect time to learn a new skill that you can use to gift to your friends and relatives. These are some of the earrings that we're going to be making today, as well as the ones that I'm wearing. These will require the use of your kitchen oven, making them a perfect winter weather craft. You can do this in the summertime, but it's nice to be using your oven in the wintertime and heat your house up a little bit. So let's learn a new skill and maybe make some gifts in the process. Let's go over the supplies that we're going to be using today. Now, your supplies are going to look a little bit different than mine. I have gotten my own supplies from either what I already had or purchasing them at the store. You will be receiving a kit if you pre-registered for this program through the library. So your kit is going to look a little bit different than what I have in front of me. And I'm also going to show some optional things that you can use as well as alternatives for things that you can use. So let's start over here. We've got our parchment paper. You should have this in your kit. You might also have this in your kitchen already. This is excellent for not only baking the clay when you're finished with your projects, but it can also be really helpful when you are making your project. You're going to need something to roll your clay with. This is an acrylic tube. Most of what you are going to see at the craft stores that is for making clay jewelry or working with clay is going to be an acrylic roller like this. They usually run about $8 to $10 for a roller. This one I bought at a local plastic supplier. They sell rods in different lengths, so I was able to go in and get a short one made as well as this longer one if I was doing a bigger project. So you might be able to find something like this someplace other than a craft store. You can also, if you don't have something like this, you can use anything really that's going to be a smooth cylinder. If you have a rolling pin in your kitchen, you can actually put your clay in 2 pieces of parchment paper or fold over a piece of parchment paper and roll it in that so that it doesn't stick to your rolling pin. You don't want to use anything that's porous like wood because the clay is going to stick in all the nooks and crannies, and it'll be hard to get it off of your roller. So you want to make sure that if you're not using something that is non-stick and smooth like this, that you sandwich it in some parchment paper. Even something like a marker that's flat and smooth could work for this. Alright, you're going to need a toothpick for making holes. You can also use this for making designs on your clay, which we will talk about. You will have in your kit a couple of different sizes of circle cutters for making your shapes. You're also going to want something to cut the clay, either a craft knife like this X-Acto or a small kitchen knife that's clean. I'm going to mostly be using this plastic razor blade here. It's all plastic, so it's a little bit easier to work with and safer than a bare razor blade, but this will be good for cutting the clay. You're also going to need your clay. You should have a few different colors to choose from in your kits. And these are the earrings that we are going to be making today. So I'm going to go over how to do the techniques for both of these styles. You also will have all of the hardware, the jump rings, the earring posts, and the earring backs to complete your jewelry. And I'm going to talk about these styles, but the techniques that we're using, you're going to be able to kind of mix things up and make your own creations based on what we're going to learn. All right, so the surface that I'm working on today is a glass craft mat. So you're gonna have to bear with me. There's gonna be a lot of reflections and light kind of being weird. You probably see something around here that's light reflecting from outdoors. It's gonna be a little funky, but working on glass is one of the best surfaces when you're working with clay. It's okay if you don't have a glass surface to work on at home. You can also put down some parchment paper onto a table and tape it down so it stays nice and flat if you don't have any glass to work on. Or if you have a non-stick craft mat. If you go to the store and look in the clay aisle, you'll see they do have non-stick craft mats there. You know, whatever, any of those that you can use, glass, non-stick craft mat, or parchment paper, those are going to be the surfaces you want to work on. You don't want to work just on a bare table like your coffee table or your dining table, because you could mess up the finish on it with the residue from the clay. It might also stick and be hard to work with. We're also going to be using knives and cutters, and you don't want to make any marks in a tabletop that you don't want there after you're done with your craft project. So use one of those surfaces that I mentioned. This is, as I said, is just a glass crafting mat. It's not specifically for working for clay. It's for all kinds of crafts. This one happens to be the Tonic Studios Tim Holtz glass craft mat. There are lots of other brands that sell things like this, but again, it is not essential for the project that we're working on. You can just tape down some parchment paper if that's all you have. We're going to start with this basic design here. The first step is going to be conditioning your clay, or getting it ready to work with. You have a few colors in your kit, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the different kinds of clay that are available. One tip that I have noticed while working with clay is that if possible, you should start working with your lighter colors and then move to your darker colors. Your hands can pick up a lot of the color, your surface can pick up the color, so it's better if you start with the light and then move to the darker ones. You can also wash your hands in between using the colors, wipe down your work surface, or maybe have multiple parchment papers for doing the different colors. However you want to do it, you just don't want to mix your clay colors unless that is your intention. So, speaking of mixing clay colors, you can do that. If you don't really like the particular colors you have, you can do your own mixing. If you don't like the colors that are at the store, you can try to do your own blending. Everyone is getting different colors in their kit, so I'm not sure exactly which ones you're going to have, and mine are going to be a little bit different than the ones you're working with. So for today, I purchased several different kinds of Sculpey clay. You will most likely be working with the Sculpey 3 in your kits. Of course, you are not going to see any of the packaging because we have taken these and broken them up into the kits so that everyone can get a variety. But Sculpey 3 is a good basic one. They have basic colors, not any kind of specialty effects or different kinds of added things, just plain solid colors, very easy to work with. I also purchased a couple of Sculpey Primo kits here. I wanted to show you just a little bit of variety. I didn't want to go too far into the specialty clays. There's a lot of different stuff out there. You can get glitter, metallic, even things that look sort of like leather or have a leather texture once they're baked, translucent ones, all kinds of different things. So really, I just got a couple that are kind of specialty so that you could see a little bit of what that looks like. And it'll also help us to talk about what to do with if you're working with different clays when it's time to bake them, which we will get to later. You can see that for these earrings, I used this Sculpey Primo granite effect, and it has a lot of different specks in it and a little bit of sparkle. Now, if you wanted to have different flecks of color or maybe a marbleized texture, you could mix together some of your colors and get a blended look. Put little flecks in and not overmix your clay, and you'll see those different colors. But you can also buy your own that are already mixed or have the effect in them. And these do still have the price tags on. You can see a package of clay is not very expensive when you're thinking about how much jewelry you could get out of one of these packs. I barely used any to make the earrings that we're going to make today. And you can keep this in storage for quite a long time because this is oven baked clay and not air dry clay. So you can store this and keep working with it for a very long time. But this package, most of these packages, were actually under $3 a piece, and they are often on sale at the craft stores. So if you wanted to go and get more clay, if you really like working with clay after we learned today, it's pretty easy to come by, and it'll last you quite a while. All right, so first we're going to start conditioning some clay. Now when you get it, it comes in these little bars, and you can break them off kind of like a Kit Kat. They just come in these little chunks, and you'll see it's pretty solid and hard to do anything with, right? And these are just some scraps that I threw into the package from the last time that I was working with the clay. So what you have to do is called conditioning. You're going to take a little piece, you can break it apart a few times, and you're just going to work with it in your fingers to start to soften it up. You can work on your mat. Kind of like kneading dough. And just play with it until it is pliable enough to work with. You don't want to overwork it and get it too sticky. If it's sticking to your fingertips, that's going to be a problem. So you want it soft enough, but not too soft. And that's probably going to be a balance that you have to learn by experience. The different kinds of clay are also going to have different points at which they soften up. The Sculpey 3 is going to soften up a lot faster than some of these Primo ones, just because these have more stuff in them that needs working in. But once you've got it kind of softened up, you're ready to roll it out. All right, so let's talk about rolling. Now, you're going to see a lot of people who use more advanced tools if they do a lot of clay jewelry making. And one of those tools is going to be a pasta machine. And now, essentially, it is exactly like a pasta machine, but you would not use the same machine for making pasta as you would for working with your clay. You don't want to mix the food and the non-food safe items. if you were going to use one, you would buy a pasta machine that is exclusively for your clay projects. You will find them in the clay tool aisle at the craft store, and I will put a little photo up here to show you what that looks like. Now, this is going to be something that you would put your clay through and crank it, and it will smooth it out to a specific thickness. It's a little harder to get a specific thickness when you're just working with a roller by hand, but we are just trying to do a basic jewelry making here. We're not getting into the professional tools. With any craft, really, there's the basics, and then if you want to really dive into it, there's always going to be more and more advanced tools that you can get. So for this program, we're just going to be dealing with the basics of working with clay, and it's not going to come out exactly like some of those professional clay jewelry pieces that you might have seen before. But one way that you can achieve a little bit more uniform thickness is by putting something down to control the height of your rolling. Now, if you ever bake, you might already be familiar with something like this. Sometimes you can get a rolling pin that has guides that go onto the sides of it, and sometimes you can get little things that you just roll over, like what I'm using today. These are just popsicle sticks. You can see they're 2 popsicle sticks that I have taped together with double-sided tape, and I'm just going to put those down so that when I roll, I get an even thickness. It's not a perfect system, and you don't have to use something like this. You can just roll it out without these and be careful of getting a uniform thickness. Also, this is handmade jewelry. It doesn't have to be completely perfect. If your goal is to have something that's completely uniform, really polished, then you're going to want to keep going and get more advanced equipment. But for this, we're just going to do some simple earrings, okay? So don't worry too much about making a perfect thickness. Now you can see that my rollers have made it so that my clay is a pretty uniform thickness. And if that is too thick, you could always just do 1 popsicle stick. You can use layers of cardboard, whatever you have around to make something like this. Again, it's not essential. You can just roll this without those guides and still get a pretty uniform thickness. It's not perfect, but it doesn't have to be. So I'm going to condition a little bit more clay, and then we'll jump back into this. All right, I conditioned a little bit more clay so that I had a larger work surface and rolled this out nice and even. And now I do have a few little air pockets you can see in here. If that bothers you, then just make sure that when you're cutting out your shapes, you avoid those areas and then remix them and roll them out to cut another one. So I'm just going to cut a few little circles out of here. I think I should be able to get 3. Now I only need 2 to make 1 pair of earrings, but I'm going to use one as an example for a different technique. And then I'm just putting this into a little ball and setting it aside with the rest of my clay. Now I have a few of these little circles that I can work with. When you are peeling them off of your surface, you want to be careful not to warp the shape too much. If you make a little dent, you just carefully smooth it back out. But you do need to be able to peel these off and work with them. Sometimes when you cut your shape, it leaves a little bit of a rough edge, so I like to go around and just smooth that out. You can kind of see here, there's a little bit sticking out. But I can just smooth that down, and that looks a lot better. All right, so I wanted to show you how I went about making these different tops for these earrings. These are both from this one shape here. All I did was cut the edges off of the circle. So I'm going to use my plastic blade, and I'm just going to very carefully look and eyeball this. It does help having a grid on my work surface, but still, this is not going to come out totally perfect. So I'm just going to look and kind of eyeball to make this shape. And this one is a lot thinner than the one that I made before. You can see it's going to be a little bit smaller, but you can kind of experiment and get the right shape down. The nice thing about working with clay is if you don't like it, you just smush it back together and roll it and try it again. But now you can kind of see how I got that shape just from working with one basic cutter. It makes it really easy to get a starting point instead of just rolling out your clay and trying to cut a shape out. You can do that. You can use a craft knife or something to cut your own free-handed shape. You can also cut out a piece of paper as a guide and lay that template onto your clay and cut around that. Lots of different options, but you can also just make these nice basic circles, and then you're going to want to put a hole in them. Now, a lot of people who do professional clay jewelry or make a lot of clay jewelry on a regular basis, they would tell you that they're going to do their holes after they bake it. That's an extra step that we don't want to have to do today. It is an option if you are interested, but I am just going to use a toothpick while they are unhardened to make a hole. If you wanted to do the holes afterward, it is a lot cleaner, but you do have to use a drill. And like I said, that's a whole nother step that we don't need to get into right now, but I'm just telling you that that is another option. So I'm just going to very carefully make my hole. You want it close enough to the bottom that your jump ring is going to fit through it, but not too close that it tears through. And you want to try to be careful to not change the shape of your object while you're doing it. You don't want to stretch out the clay too much. I'm going to flip it over because it's a lot smaller on the back. I'm just going to carefully widen up that hole. Right, and then I'm going to take a piece of parchment paper and set my finished items to the side while we work on the rest. Just widen that one up there too. All right, so now I have two pieces for a pair of earrings, and I'm going to set those off to the side. So now I can work on the rest of it. For these ones, I'm going to mix and match. I'm doing the top portion in one color, and I'm going to do the bottom portion in a different color. You don't have to do that. You can do one color. You can do however you want. These are going to be your designs. So I'm just going to take my clay, ball it up, set it back with my same color, and get ready for my next color. Like I said, you might want to wipe down your work surface or wash your hands between colors to avoid picking up too much color and transferring it to the next clay. So right off the bat, I'm grabbing some of my Sculpey 3, and this is already way softer than my last color, just because of the nature of this particular clay. You're going to notice when you work with the different clays that they all act a little bit differently. So I don't have to do too much to work this one. And I am going to need a little bit more than that because I'm going to be making a bigger piece than my last cutout. I'm going to be using this cutter. So I'm just gonna condition a little bit extra. Put it all together. All right, let's get this rolled. I think I am ready to cut. Hopefully I made this big enough to get 2 circles. All right, take that away. Move these out of the way, and I'm actually going to make a couple of other ones so that I can show you some more techniques. Okay, and then I'm just going to ball this up and set it to the side with the rest of that color. Now, like we did with the last one, I'm just going to smooth the edges out. Now, the softer your clay is, the more you're going to end up with the fingerprint issue. Just try to be careful. You can just kind of smooth the surface out by gently rubbing your finger across it if you do notice that you're getting some fingerprints on there. And like I said, the softer your clay is, the more it's going to stick to you. You can kind of see a little bit of that color rubbing off on my fingertips. If your clay starts to get too soft, just set it to the side for a little while, wash your hands, and then try doing it again in a little while. You can also add some dry, unconditioned clay to it if it's too sticky to help with that. All right, so now these two are going to be for the bottom of my pair of earrings. And I'm just going to go through and make some holes because I'm not going to do anything to these. I'm just making a pair of solid earrings. Set those over on my parchment paper. All right, now we can talk about some different techniques. So if you wanted to leave them nice and smooth, there they are. They're all done, they're ready to go. If you wanted to do a texture or an image on these, there are different ways to do that. First of all, you have your toothpick. You can make a pattern on here by poking it, by drawing lines in it, by just pushing the toothpick on its side to make waves. There's all kinds of things you can do with just one toothpick to create all kinds of texture to your clay. But there's other things that you can try as well. I have seen people use all kinds of different things to imprint textures on them. If you have things around your house, you can try that might, have a texture to them. You can imprint into this. The main thing you want to know is protecting your surface with plastic beforehand is important. Whatever surface you're going to use, you don't want the clay to get embedded into it, so you'll just want to cover over your clay and make sure that it's nice and smooth, there's no wrinkles. Because if there is a wrinkle, that will come across as a texture into your clay. So I'm just smoothing that out. And I space them apart from each other so that when I imprint the textures, I'm not pushing down on both of them at once. It just makes it a little bit easier. So as I said, you could just use the toothpick on the bare clay, but if you're going to use something else, we'll cover it in plastic first and look around our house and see if we can find something to use. Today, I'm actually going to be using embossing folders, which you may have seen before if you are an avid crafter. These are for creating a texture in paper. You put the paper in between them and run it through a press, and it presses this into your paper. But today we're actually going to use them to imprint into the clay. And you can find so many different patterns with these, but today I think I am going to actually use this pattern. So when you open it up, that's where the actual texture is. And I'm just going to flip it over onto my nice plastic and just gently push into the clay. I don't want to push too much because I don't want to flatten my piece, but I want to push enough that I get that texture imprinted onto here. Now you can also do this before you cut your circles, and then you can actually plan out what part of the design you want. I find it really easy to do once you already have it wrapped in the plastic. Now, this one came out much clearer than the one on the right. I just didn't press quite evenly on that one. So I could just smooth this out a little bit and do it again. I can even flip it over to the back, because you're going to glue something on the back. You're not going to really see that, so it's not going to matter. And then I can try it again. Like I said, it's so fun working with the clay because when you make a mistake, you just smooth it out or re-roll it. It's really forgiving. All right, so that one came out a lot clearer, as you can see. Now those are just ready to set to the side for when I'm ready to bake. So let me bring my sheet back over here and we can talk about what we have done so far. So far, I have one pair of earrings here. These match nicely with each other. These will bake up, and then I will just put my jump ring through there. These will just be a pair on their own, a smaller pair of earrings. So now we're ready to talk about the rainbow earrings. And I'm sure you're so excited about these. These are very popular. Now, once again, there are tools that are out there you can get that make this much more uniform and easier to do lots of all at once. To make these tubes, you can buy something called a clay extruder. It's a little tube with a press at the end that you either push or crank depending on the model, and it pushes the clay through the tube, and it's kind of like those holiday cookie presses that you might have used growing up, where it has little plates that are different shapes you put at the end of the tube, and it squeezes the dough out. It's the same thing for the clay extruder. It's going to have different shapes, such as a circle, to make these little tubes, and it will push the clay through the tube and have a nice uniform strand of clay that comes out that you can then turn into something. Today we are going to learn how to do this by hand, so it's not going to be as perfect as some you may have seen out there, but I'm just telling you, if you want to do that, those tools are out there. After we learn this today, if you want to keep going with it, there's tons of different options to explore. So I have 3 different colors for my rainbow and then 1 different color for the top piece. You could do a shape, you could do a circle, however you want to have your top of your earring. So kind of plan that out. Figure out what colors you want to use, what order you're going to put them in. Think about that a little bit as you get started. And like I said, you want to work with your lighter color up to your darker color. I'm going to condition some of my first color that I was working with. This has already stiffened up since I was working with it before. So for this, we're going to roll our tubes by hand. This is the hardest part for me because it requires patience, and I don't have a lot of patience. So if you are like me, this may be a little bit more difficult for you. Once I have it conditioned, I'm just going to start rolling it into a little cylinder like this. Then you want to put it on your surface and just use the palm of your hand to keep forming that tube. You don't want to put too much pressure on it because you can end up with uneven spots. But you do want to put enough pressure that you're starting to elongate that tube. And you can see that I am moving my hand up and down my piece as I go to try to keep making a uniform strand here. And since this is starting to get a lot longer, it's going to be a little bit harder to keep it uniform throughout. Whenever you reach the thickness that you want, you can stop. But you're going to have to make sure that you try to get all of your pieces about the same thickness. All right. That is mostly even. So I'm going to actually pick this up and set it off to the side and do my next color. And since I'm working from my light to my darker, I'm not going to wash my hands in between these because it should not affect the next one very much. You want to make sure you give yourself enough space for these because you do need to get them pretty long to be able to do 2 of them. If you don't have a lot of workspace or it's easier for you to work with these in smaller segments, you can definitely do that too. You'll just have to repeat the process a couple of times to complete your 2 pairs of earrings. Now, this is getting a little bit lumpy throughout. It's quite a bit lumpy. So, I might start this one over. But, for now, we're just going to set it to the side. Alright, now I'm on to my last color. And you can see, because this one is a lot darker, it's already starting to stain my very pale skin. But that's okay. Sometimes you gotta get a little bit messy when you're doing crafts, right? These ones are a little bit harder to work with because they are so much softer. I'm getting a little bit off here. So what I'm gonna do is just cut this in half, move one section to the side, and then I can keep working on my smaller segment. Set that to the side. Work on my next one. And set that to the side. All right, and now I need to decide which color I want to use as my top for my earring. Now, you don't have to do that if you don't want to make it a dangly earring. You could just have all of these together and then attach the earring post to the back. It's going to be a little bit more difficult because these are not flat, but it can be done. I am going to make a little circle for mine though. I'm just going to use my darkest color. Almost don't have enough. I think I just barely can get that in there. All right, perfect. All right. Now, because I just worked with my darkest color, I'm gonna go wash my hands before I assemble these all together. All right, now that I've gotten some of that color off of my fingers, I'm gonna just wipe my mat down a little bit here. I'm ready to work with all of my pieces. First, I'm gonna take these and put the holes in them. And set them off to the side. All right. Now I'm ready to start assembling. I'm just going to cut these in half to do my two earrings, and I might need to actually roll that out. That's a little uneven. All right. So I'm just going to start to make a little arch, and I'm not going to have my earrings be this big. I'm going to be cutting the bottoms off all at once to make it even, so I want to have some extra, and I still think that these could go a little bit thin around the ends, but it does not have to be perfectly even. These are going to be cute even if they're a little bit off. There you go, that's a little bit better. Okay, so I've got my first one, and then I'm gonna take my next color, cut that in half, and put it around. And I've already cut my last one. Alright, so now I can kind of work with these all together and make them a little bit more of the size that I want. I'm gonna bring this really close together. And this is another point when having this grid is going to come in handy, because I can kind of line it up so that when I cut the bottom, I can make these even. Now while you're putting these together, you want to make sure that they are nice and snug up against each other so that when they bake, they stay together. You can glue them afterward if they don't totally stick together. It's not the end of the world if they come out and pop apart. You can just glue them. But if you make sure they're nice and snug and smooth while you're doing it, it's just going to be a little bit easier in the long run. Now, a lot of people who do this more professionally will use a liquid clay to join their pieces together, and it's basically just what it sounds like. It is a liquid version of this clay that you would put on here to join all your pieces together and then bake it, and it hardens up with everything. It's kind of like a clay glue, but it's just a liquid version of itself to help everything stay together. So if you're doing little smaller pieces, attaching them to each other, that is an option. But it worked totally fine for me to just have these all individual and then snug them up together. They're nice and tight and they're not going anywhere. And I didn't glue it. I didn't use any kind of special additive. All right. So now I need to determine how long of a rainbow I want. I think I'm going to make these a little bit longer than my last pair. Okay. Actually, I'm just going to leave that there so that I can line these ones up next to it and make sure that I get the right size. Now I'm trying to be careful because now that I've worked with all of them to assemble them, I am getting a little bit of the dark color on my fingertips. So just make sure you're aware of that as you're working with it. And I accidentally got a little line in that, so I'm going to flip it around so I don't see it. It's easy to hide mistakes by flipping them around to the back. So this is looking like it's more the same shape of the other one. Just want to make sure everybody's all joined together. Now you can see by looking at this that it's not totally even. There's some thicker and thinner parts on these, and that's okay. This is a handmade piece of jewelry. And the imperfections we're just going to embrace. Alright, so those are about even at the top there. Now I can see my line down here to cut these. And there we go. Now we have a nice matching pair. So how do we get the hole in these? Just like everything else, we're going to use our toothpick. But I went a little bit in between. I think it's easier to do it kind of in that groove in between two of my colors. All right. Then these ones are going to be a little bit trickier to pick up, especially if you make them longer like I did. You just want to make sure before you go to bake them that they're laying the way that you want on your tray. I'm going to bring my parchment paper over here so you can see what all we have done. Look at that. So many different techniques here. And these are ready to bake. The other cool thing about oven bake clay is if you wanted to work on your earrings and then you got to go do something else, you don't have time to bake them, you just leave them. You could put something kind of over the top that's not touching them, you know, like a box lid or something if you want to protect them from getting any kind of dust on them if it's going to be a while before you work with them again. But you can leave these for quite some time and they're not going to dry out because it needs to be oven baked to completely cure. Okay, so you can work on this a little bit, set it to the side, make some more, set those to the side, and then do a big batch when you're all ready to bake them. Or you can just do a little bit and bake it and then do some more later, however you want to do it. It's just kind of nice to have that option since it doesn't air dry. Now I'm going to go through and take all of my extra pieces of clay and just put them back with their same colors so that I can use them later. And we're ready to bake. So, how do we go about baking when we have different kinds of clay that we've been working with? When you buy clay, it will have on the side the baking temperature and how long you want to bake it for. Even though I got different kinds of clay, I made sure that they all had the same baking temperature. So, these Sculpey 3s, 275 for 15 minutes. These Primo clays are 275 for 30 minutes. It makes it much easier if you have the same baking temperature because then you can just play around a little bit with the time. Since these are going to bake at the same temperature, one is 15-minute bake time, one is a 30-minute bake time. You don't want to overdo it too much and burn the one that has the lower bake time. So what I did is just kind of split the time slightly, and I went up to 20 minutes instead of 15 minutes, checked on them to make sure they were okay, removed any that were one color by themselves that were done, and then kept baking the other ones for a little bit extra time. You just want to keep checking on it frequently to make sure that you're not overdoing it. If you wanted to, you could just cut some small test pieces and bake them and see how they do before you bake any of this jewelry that you've spent time making. That's one way to do it. It never hurts to test things out first. But since I have practiced a little bit, I'm ready to take these to the oven. So now I'm just going to preheat the oven to 275. And you can see that I have my pieces on a piece of parchment paper right on the baking sheet. And I'm just setting those right into the oven. Now that we have our clay pieces baked, it's time to glue on the earring hardware and attach the jump rings. I like to work on a piece of scrap paper when I'm doing anything with glue, just to keep my work surface protected, especially something like super glue. This really does not like to come off of surfaces. If you want, you can use a toothpick to dab into the glue to spread onto your surface. You can also just dip the pieces right into it. So I'm just going to put a tiny little bit of glue on my work surface here. And take one of my earring parts and just dab it into the glue. I'm just holding it up while that little bead, you probably can't even see it on the camera, it's so small, but there was a little bead of glue connecting the spot and the piece, so I just waited until that separated so I don't drag it across my whole work surface. And then I'm going to flip to the back of my earring piece that's going to be my post part, and I'm just gonna glue that right on there. Now you have to determine where you want to have your post, how high you want this to be sitting on your ear. So this is kind of in the center, and I have small earlobes, so I might actually just move this up a little bit. While the glue is still wet, you have time to rearrange and decide if you want it in a different spot. But then when you go to do your next one, you want to make sure that you put it in the same area. Also be aware of where you have your little spot of glue, and you don't put your hand through it at any point or get it onto a piece that you don't want to be gluing. So those are about in the same spot. Now I would let those sit aside and dry before attaching my jump rings so that everything is can stay in place so I don't accidentally pop that off while I'm doing the other part of it. So let's just let those dry for a few minutes and then come back. Now that I've given these some time to dry, we can attach them to the rest of our piece using jump rings. Now, something that I did not consider when I was putting the holes in these pieces was the size of my jump ring. This is the size ring that I was planning to use. It's nice and thin, so it'll fit through my small holes that I've created, but it's not quite as wide as it should be for letting these dangle off of this piece. So I did grab some other jump rings, however, these are a little bit thicker. This is probably the size that I would want, but it would be better if they were a little bit thinner. Now, if I wanted to, I do have a small drill bit, so I could make these holes a little bit bigger and use these wider jump rings. But for right now, I'm just going to use the little ring and try to get it on there. It might not move around as freely as it would if I was using a bigger one. Now, you can use pliers. It makes things a lot easier. If you have a very thin jump ring, you can open it with your fingers. However, it is much easier to have something to hold on to these with, whether it's tweezers or pliers, something so that you can kind of hold on to it and get your fingers out of the way. And I'm going to just flip this around to the back. Determine which side is your front and which side is your back. Make sure you have your jump ring open wide enough. The reason you want to go from the back is if you accidentally slip and scratch your piece, you're not going to see that from the front. So we're just going to put that on there. Now I'm going to reposition. And I'm going to go from the back of this piece. I'm just going to close it. Actually, I'm going to feed this through so that the opening is on the back side for the same purpose, so that if I shift things, I don't accidentally scratch anything. So you can see I didn't allow enough space in between these, so it's really tight. So I'm going to grab another pair of pliers so I can really get in here and close this. It is going to be tricky. And that might be as far as it goes. All right, so that's as far as that one's gonna go. It shouldn't be open like that, but like I said, I did not plan and give myself enough space. Now, because I was doing this by hand, the hole sizes are slightly different. I think that these ones are a little bit bigger, so I'm going to go ahead and use my thicker jump rings. Once again, I'm going to flip it around to my back side. I already had it. I'm going to go in from the back side. Same thing, I'm going to go in from the back side. And you can see little pieces of clay from the edge of that hole. When I made it with that toothpick, I had a little bit of extra around the edges, and that's just falling off as I put this through. Now this is tight, so I'm not going to try to flip it around to the back. I'm just going to be really careful. And when you go to bring them together, I always go a little bit past the edge of the other one because it will pull back again with the tension. So now you have that nice and evenly matched. And now I should be able to tuck that back in so that I don't see the gap from the front side. All right, and there you have it. So you can see that jump ring looks much more appropriately sized than this one. I happen to have a large stockpile of different sizes of jump rings just because I make jewelry so often. But, you know, if you don't have the right size, you can always buy the right gauge wire and make your own jump rings. There's a lot of options out there. Jump rings are really easy to come by and they're really inexpensive. You can get a ton of them for not very much money. And as I said before, you can get a lot of jewelry out of the clay that you have, out of one of those packages of clay. So the parts for the earrings are really not that expensive. You can get the posts and the backs at any craft store, and jump rings as well. And this really gives you a lot of possibilities, and you can make so many from what you have. I was able to get the hole a little bit bigger in this other one, and now they have matching jump rings. They move around a lot easier, so when you're wearing them, they'll swing freely, and they both match. It just looks a little bit more polished than the one that was too small. Now, the funny thing about this is that the finish on this jump ring is a little bit better match with this pink than the other gold jump rings that I had been planning to use. I actually like the way this looks a little bit better. So it's kind of nice that I ran into that issue and had to change my plan. Sometimes when you run into an issue making a project, you forgot to do something, you don't have the supplies you thought you did, whatever the case may be, you have to kind of figure things out and find a new solution. And sometimes you end up liking that solution more than the first one. So, you know, don't be too concerned if you run into issues. Just go with it, see if you can figure it out, and you might end up with something you like even better. So that's it. We are done with our projects for today. I hope you learned something new and enjoyed the process. As usual, if you pre-registered for this program, you received my contact information, so you can email me with questions or send me photos of your projects. I look forward to hearing from you, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye!